If you enjoy videos like this, subscribe to the channel before the video starts. It was a quiet Saturday morning in a small suburban neighborhood. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and everything seemed peaceful. But for one family, peace was about to be interrupted in the most unexpected way. Karen, known around the neighborhood as the strict HOA president, was sipping her coffee on the porch. She had always been careful about rules, and in her eyes, keeping the community safe was her main job. Today, however, she noticed something she thought was very unusual. Across the street, a young girl, only 17, was walking down the sidewalk with a confident, calm demeanor. In her holster, Karen thought she saw something dangerous. Her heart raced. "That can't be real, she's carrying a gun," she whispered to herself. Karen's mind immediately went into action mode. She had to protect the neighborhood. She had to do something. She reached for her phone and dialed 911. Her fingers shook slightly as she explained, "Yes, ma'am, there's a young girl carrying a gun. I think it's dangerous. Please send someone fast." Meanwhile, the girl, whose name was Emily, was completely unaware of the storm brewing across the street. She had been practicing for a community safety badge program she was part of, which allowed her to carry a training firearm under strict supervision. But Karen didn't know any of this. As Emily approached the park, she noticed a few neighbors staring at her. Some were whispering, pointing fingers, and gossiping quietly. She kept her head high, walking steadily, focused on her training exercises. She had encountered judgment before and had learned not to react hastily. Back on her porch, Karen was growing more anxious by the second. "This is serious. Someone could get hurt," she muttered. She had called the police, and now she watched through her binoculars, ready to explain her side. She rehearsed what she would say to the officers. The girl looked too young, she was holding a weapon, and someone needed to stop her. Minutes felt like hours. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Children playing nearby paused to watch, and even dogs seemed uneasy, barking at the sudden energy in the air. Karen was pacing on her porch, muttering warnings to anyone who would listen. Then, a neighbor, Mr. Thompson, tried to calm Karen down. "Maybe it's just a training session, Karen," he suggested cautiously. But Karen shook her head vigorously. "No! I don't take chances. Look at her. That's a gun. It's dangerous. I can't wait for trouble to happen." Emily, completely calm, finished her exercises and started walking back toward her home. She noticed the police car approaching from the corner of her eye, but she didn't panic. She had been trained to stay composed in stressful situations, and she knew she was in the right. Karen, seeing the police car, waved frantically. She ran toward the street to meet them, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand. "She's carrying a gun. You need to stop her," she shouted. Her voice was sharp, and her expression was a mix of fear and authority. The officers pulled up quickly, 2 cars, lights flashing, adding even more tension to the quiet neighborhood. Emily stopped and raised her hands slightly, signaling she meant no harm. Her calm presence contrasted sharply with Karen's frantic energy. The first officer stepped out of the car. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" he asked, his tone professional but firm. Karen quickly explained everything, pointing at Emily, her voice shaking. "She's carrying a gun. She's dangerous. You have to do something." Emily, listening quietly, smiled faintly but didn't interrupt. She knew that honesty and composure would speak louder than panic or accusations. The officer approached her slowly, trying to assess the situation. He asked, "Are you armed?" "Yes, sir," Emily replied calmly. "But it's for my training badge program. I'm certified and have permission to carry this under supervision." Karen gasped. She didn't expect that answer. Her eyes widened in shock. How could a teenager be carrying a gun legally? She had never heard of such a thing. Her mind raced. "This can't be, this isn't allowed." The officer glanced at Emily's badge, checking her credentials carefully. The tension was unbearable. Karen held her breath, feeling both anxious and slightly embarrassed. She hadn't expected this outcome at all. As the officer reviewed Emily's papers, a hush fell over the neighborhood. Everyone stopped what they were doing to watch. Neighbors leaned out of windows, children whispered to each other, and Karen's coffee had gone cold on the porch. Emily remained composed, showing respect to the officer, explaining her program briefly, and answering all questions with clarity. Karen, on the other hand, was fidgeting, clearly unsure of how to react. Her mind raced, imagining the possible explanations, trying to find a flaw, but there was none. The officer finished reviewing Emily's documents. He looked at Karen and then back at Emily. "Everything seems in order," he said calmly. Karen's mouth went dry. She had called the police thinking she was protecting the neighborhood, but now she realized that she had misjudged the situation entirely. Karen's face turned red, a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Emily, still composed, nodded politely and began to lower her firearm in the proper stance. She had handled the situation perfectly, with no panic, no mistakes, and full respect for the law. And in that moment, a thought crossed Karen's mind: I called the police on a young girl, and she's more responsible than I am. The neighborhood was silent, almost in disbelief. The tension that had built over the past few minutes hung in the air like a thick fog. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Karen, still standing with her phone in her hand, finally muttered, I guess I was wrong." Emily, calm and collected, started walking toward her home. The police officers nodded politely and drove away. Karen remained on her porch, reflecting on what had just happened. She had tried to act heroically, but in the end, she had learned a lesson she would not forget anytime soon. And just when Karen thought the story was over, something happened that no one in the neighborhood expected. A moment so quick, so unexpected, that it would change everything, and it all started with that single phone call. The morning sun was still bright, but the calm of the neighborhood was fading fast. Across the street, Emily had just finished her training exercises when she noticed an unusual tension in the air. Neighbors were peeking through windows, whispering hurriedly, and a car had suddenly pulled over near the sidewalk. Karen, the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood, was now standing fully on the street, her phone in hand, eyes darting back and forth. Her mind was racing. "I have to make sure no one gets hurt. I can't let this slide," she muttered, her voice shaky yet determined. Emily approached slowly, noticing Karen waving frantically. She didn't panic. Instead, she raised a hand slightly in greeting, signaling that she was calm. But Karen didn't see the gesture as peaceful. In her mind, it looked like defiance. "You have to stop her," Karen shouted, pointing at Emily. Her voice was firm now, tinged with fear and authority. "She's carrying a gun. I'm telling you this is serious." Emily stopped in her tracks. She had been through situations like this before, people who judged too quickly without knowing the facts, but this felt different. Karen seemed unusually frantic, almost panicked, and that made Emily more cautious. She subtly adjusted her stance, keeping her training and calmness in mind. From a distance, a few neighbors watched the growing drama unfold. Mr. Thompson, an older man who usually stayed out of neighborhood politics, whispered to his wife, "She doesn't know what she's doing. That girl is trained. She's not a threat." Karen, meanwhile, was pacing nervously. Her mind jumped from one worst-case scenario to another. What if she shoots someone by accident? What if the kids are outside? I have to call the police. Now! She raised her phone again, ready to explain everything in precise detail. But then, something unexpected happened. Emily spoke calmly, her voice soft but firm. "Ma'am, I'm part of a community safety program. I'm certified and allowed to carry this under supervision." Her words were measured, confident. But Karen barely registered them. She was too wrapped up in fear, imagining chaos. The neighbors could see the tension building. A small dog barked nervously, adding to the drama. Emily's calm demeanor clashed with Karen's hysteria, creating a strange but powerful contrast. The atmosphere was electric, tense, fragile, and unpredictable. Karen waved at the approaching police car, her fingers trembling. She practically ran to meet the officers, repeating her warning, "She's carrying a gun. You have to stop her before it's too late." Her voice grew louder, almost desperate. Emily didn't move. She stayed where she was, calm and respectful, knowing that any sudden motion could make the situation worse. The officers stepped out, alert but professional. They immediately noticed Karen's panic. One officer said quietly, "Let's hear her out first." Karen launched into her explanation. She gestured wildly, eyes wide, voice shaky. "She's young. She has a gun. I don't know what she's planning. You need to do something." Emily remained silent, listening patiently. Then, with quiet authority, she held up her badge and said, "Officer, I am authorized to carry this firearm for training. Here are my credentials." Karen froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't expected this. Her mind raced, struggling to process the information. She had been sure Emily was dangerous, but now everything seemed wrong. How can a teenager be allowed to carry a gun legally? The officer took the badge, scanning it carefully. The silence was deafening. The neighbors held their breath, the air thick with suspense. Even the wind seemed to pause. Karen's face turned red, not with anger, but with embarrassment. Every eye in the neighborhood was on her. She realized she had acted impulsively, judging a young girl without knowing the facts. Emily, calm as ever, continued to stand tall. Her presence was commanding yet non-threatening. She answered the officer's questions politely, showing respect and composure. Karen, on the other hand, fidgeted nervously, struggling to find words. Then, in a moment of irony, the officer smiled slightly and said, "Everything checks out. She is authorized." Karen's knees nearly buckled. She had called the police thinking she was protecting the community, and now she realized that she had been completely wrong. The tension didn't fade immediately. Karen stood there, frozen, phone still in hand, unsure whether to apologize or retreat. Emily started walking calmly toward her home, her training evident in every step. The officer gave a respectful nod, signaling that the situation was under control. But just as Karen was beginning to grasp what had happened, something happened that no one expected. Something small, subtle, yet powerful enough to completely shift the balance of the neighborhood drama. A single glance, a short comment from a neighbor, and Karen realized that this incident was far from over, and it would teach her a lesson she would never forget. The sound of sirens cut through the morning calm like a sharp knife. Neighborhood birds scattered, and even the usually quiet street seemed to hold its breath. Karen's heart raced faster than the police lights flashing across the pavement. She waved frantically, practically jumping up and down, as the patrol cars screeched to a stop. Emily stayed perfectly still, her posture straight, her hands visible. Every move she made was careful, deliberate. She knew any sudden motion could turn a misunderstanding into a disaster. Yet, her calmness radiated confidence. A contrast so stark it made the tension almost unbearable. The first officer stepped out, eyes scanning the scene like a hawk. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice firm but professional. Karen rushed forward, pointing directly at Emily. "This girl. She's carrying a gun. She's dangerous. You have to stop her before," her words stumbled out, chaotic and urgent. Emily raised her hands slightly, palms open. "Officer, I'm authorized to carry this firearm for a community training program," she said in a controlled tone. "Here's my badge." The officer paused, his gaze flicking from Karen's panicked face to Emily's composed stance. He noticed the neighbors craning their necks to see what was happening, some whispering under their breath. One child clutched his mother's hand, wide-eyed, unsure if he should be scared or fascinated. Karen's mouth fell open. She hadn't anticipated this. A trained teenager, carrying a gun legally? Her thoughts spun faster than she could speak. She fumbled for words, trying to explain, trying to justify her call. I thought she was dangerous. I was protecting the neighborhood." The officer stepped closer to Emily, carefully inspecting her badge and documents. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Even Karen, normally quick to assert authority, was now speechless, her confidence evaporating in the face of facts she hadn't known. Suddenly, a neighbor whispered loudly enough for Karen to hear, "See? She's trained. She's safe." Karen's face turned red, not with anger, but with embarrassment. Her mistake was undeniable. Emily maintained eye contact with the officer, calm and composed. "Officer, I'm following all the rules," she added. "Everything is in order. There's no threat." The officer nodded slowly, scanning the badge one more time. Then, just as he was about to speak, Karen did something unexpected. She took a step back, as if realizing the full weight of her error. Her hands trembled, and she muttered, I didn't know." The officer finally looked at Karen with a neutral expression. "Ma'am, thank you for your concern. But everything here is lawful and safe." The words hit Karen like a cold wave. She had called the police to protect the community, and yet, she was now the one under scrutiny, her panic, her assumptions, her judgment. Emily started to slowly holster her firearm, her movements precise, professional. Each motion emphasized her training and authority, a silent reminder to everyone watching that she was in control of the situation. The neighborhood, which had been holding its collective breath, exhaled in relief. But the tension wasn't gone completely. Karen still stood frozen, phone dangling from her hand, unsure whether to apologize or flee. She had realized her mistake, but pride and fear tangled together, making her hesitation visible. Then came a subtle, almost unnoticed detail. One of the officers glanced at Emily's uniform patches and smiled faintly. "Looks like you've got a real talent," he said quietly, almost to himself. Karen heard it, and it stung. The young girl she had underestimated was being praised right in front of her. The neighbors watched, some whispering admiringly. "Wow, she's so composed," one said. Another added, "I can't believe Karen called the police on her." Even Karen couldn't argue silently. Everyone's eyes were on her, a mix of disbelief and mild amusement reflected back at her. Emily, aware of all eyes on her, nodded politely to the officers and began walking toward her home. Each step was calm, deliberate, and confident. The officers gave her respectful nods. Karen, still standing, could only watch as the girl she had doubted left the scene unshaken. And then, in a small but shocking moment, one officer added quietly to Karen, not for Emily's ears, but loud enough for the neighbors to catch, 42 seconds is all it took for us to see the truth. Karen's stomach sank. She realized the call she thought was necessary, heroic even, had been unnecessary. And that tiny sentence from the officer hinted at a bigger twist yet to come, a recognition, an honor, and a lesson she would never forget. The street, which had been a stage for panic and misunderstanding, now settled into an uneasy calm. The incident was far from over, and Karen felt a creeping realization: sometimes, the people you judge the fastest are the ones you should respect the most. The street had fallen into an uneasy silence. Karen still stood frozen, phone in hand, watching Emily. The girl seemed calm, almost untouchable, and that calmness gnawed at Karen's confidence. How could someone so young carry herself with such authority? How could she have been right all along? The officer who had been examining Emily's badge stepped closer, his eyes sharp and thoughtful. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "I think it's time you see why we take her very seriously." He gestured to Emily, who was still standing perfectly poised, like a soldier ready for inspection. Karen frowned, confusion mixing with embarrassment. "What do you mean?" "She's just a kid," she muttered under her breath, her voice cracking slightly. Emily's calm voice broke the tension. "Officer, may I demonstrate?" she asked politely. The officer nodded, and suddenly, everything on the street changed. In a swift, fluid motion, Emily reached into her training bag and carefully placed the firearm on the ground. She then took out a small badge, shining under the morning sun. "I am part of the National Youth Law Enforcement Training Program," she explained. "I've completed rigorous training in firearm safety, situational awareness, and emergency response. I am certified to carry this for my program, and I have earned every part of this badge." Karen's jaw dropped. She had never imagined anything like this. Her mind raced. This can't be real, she's just a teenager. How could she possibly? The officer then asked Emily to demonstrate a short exercise, a standard safety check she had performed hundreds of times. She moved with precision, checking the firearm, holstering it safely, and demonstrating control and composure that most adults could only dream of. Neighbors gasped. Some whispered to each other, pointing discreetly. "Wow, she's amazing," one murmured. Another added, "I can't believe Karen called the police on her." Karen, meanwhile, could barely move. Her hands trembled, and her face was pale. She had been so certain Emily was dangerous, and yet, here she was, proving herself as someone not just responsible, but exceptional. Then came the part that really shattered Karen's assumptions. One officer said aloud, just so everyone could hear, 42 seconds is all it took for us to confirm that she is fully qualified and authorized. She is not a threat, she is a professional in training, and she has earned our respect. Karen's eyes widened further. Her mind flashed back to the moment she had made the call, the panic, the fear, the rush to judgment. And now, the reality hit her like a wave. She had completely misjudged Emily. Emily smiled faintly, polite but firm. "I know it may have looked alarming," she said to Karen. "But rules exist for a reason. Training and respect make all the difference." Karen swallowed hard, struggling to find words. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to defend herself, but no words felt right. Her pride, shaken and humbled, forced her to stay silent. She realized something important: judgment without understanding could lead to embarrassment, or worse. The neighbors, now fully aware of the situation, began to clap softly, impressed by Emily's professionalism. Children looked on in awe, some whispering, "I want to be like her someday." Emily carefully collected her badge and firearm, securing them in her bag with expert precision. Every movement radiated control, discipline, and maturity far beyond her years. Karen could only stare, feeling the weight of her mistake pressing down on her shoulders. Then, in a small but impactful gesture, one of the officers approached Emily and said, "Would you like to join the official recognition ceremony later today? Your actions today deserve more than just acknowledgement, it deserves honor." Emily nodded politely, and the officer turned to Karen. "Sometimes," he said gently, "the people we underestimate are the ones who teach us the biggest lessons." Karen's cheeks burned with shame and realization. She had called the police thinking she was protecting the neighborhood. Instead, she had been a witness to something extraordinary, a young girl proving that courage, discipline, and respect could overcome fear and misunderstanding. And as Emily walked calmly toward her home, the neighbors still whispering in amazement, Karen stood frozen, reflecting. This wasn't just about a gun or a badge, it was about trust, judgment, and the lesson that appearances could be deceiving. In that moment, Karen knew something had changed. Her perception of Emily, and perhaps even herself, would never be the same. And the next part of the story, the recognition, the honor, and the full twist of fate, was about to unfold, leaving the entire neighborhood speechless. The quiet neighborhood had transformed into a stage for something far bigger than anyone expected. The officers stood tall, observing Emily with admiration, while Karen still lingered nearby, phone in hand, frozen between embarrassment and disbelief. Emily, calm as ever, turned slowly to face Karen. Her eyes were steady, confident, and filled with quiet authority. "Ma'am," she said politely, "I understand your concern. But rules exist for a reason, and training makes all the difference." Karen opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. She had expected fear, chaos, or panic, but what she saw instead was control, discipline, and professionalism beyond her years. Karen realized that this young girl, whom she had misjudged in seconds, had just proven something extraordinary. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the officers called out, "Everyone, take notice. This young lady deserves recognition." Karen's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't prepared for this. Recognition? For Emily? She had just called the police thinking she was protecting the neighborhood. And now, the officers were publicly honoring the very person she had doubted. Emily approached the officer who had guided her earlier. With precise, confident movements, she presented her badge and training documents. The officer smiled and said, "It's not every day that we see someone handle a situation like this with such professionalism." You've earned more than just our respect, you've earned recognition." The neighbors, previously whispering in astonishment, now watched in awe. Children peeked from behind windows, imagining themselves in Emily's shoes. Even Karen's mouth fell open. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The officer handed Emily a formal certificate of recognition. "For quick thinking, professionalism, and excellence in law enforcement training," he announced, raising his voice so everyone could hear. The sunlight glinted off the certificate, making the moment feel cinematic. Karen's eyes widened. Every word of the announcement was a dagger to her pride. She had acted with fear and assumption, and now she was forced to witness Emily being celebrated for what Karen had feared. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, including Karen herself. Then came the moment that truly humbled her. Another officer stepped forward and pinned a small honorary badge onto Emily's uniform. The crowd clapped softly, a mix of admiration and disbelief. Emily accepted it gracefully, nodding to the officers and the neighbors. Her composure never wavered. Karen felt her face burn. She glanced at the neighborhood around her. People were whispering, shaking their heads, some even smiling at the irony of the situation. Karen had intended to protect the community, but in reality, she had interrupted a moment of excellence, misjudged a teenager, and learned a lesson she wouldn't forget. Emily then walked slowly past Karen, offering a polite nod. Karen swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. The words she wanted to say, apologies, explanations, or even excuses, seemed meaningless in the shadow of Emily's calm authority. A young neighbor whispered to his mother, "She's amazing. I want to be like her when I grow up." Karen felt a strange mix of emotions, shame, awe, and a little admiration. She realized that courage, preparation, and respect could outshine panic, fear, and judgment in ways she had never considered. And then, almost as if to underline the lesson of the morning, one officer said softly to Karen, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Sometimes, the people we doubt the most end up teaching us the greatest lessons." Karen's stomach sank. She couldn't deny it. Emily had turned a moment of misunderstanding into a moment of recognition. A moment that everyone in the neighborhood would remember. And Karen? She was left to reflect on the choices she had made and the assumptions she had jumped to in just a few frantic seconds. As Emily walked away, her head held high, badge shining in the sun, the neighborhood erupted in quiet applause. Karen stood on the sidewalk, humbled, silent, realizing that the story was no longer about fear or suspicion, it was about respect, preparation, and the incredible impact of a young person doing the right thing. The twist was complete. Karen had called the police thinking she was protecting everyone, but in the end, she had witnessed something far greater, a lesson in humility, courage, and the power of being prepared. And as Emily disappeared around the corner, Karen knew one thing for sure: she would never make the same mistake again. The neighborhood had returned to a quiet, almost surreal calm. The sun shone brighter now, but the energy in the air felt different, charged with respect, awe, and a hint of humility. Karen still stood on her porch, phone forgotten in her hand, staring at the street where Emily had just been honored. Her mind replayed every second of the morning, the frantic call, the police arrival, the calm composure of Emily, and finally, the recognition ceremony. Each memory carried a sharp lesson, one she couldn't ignore. Karen took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her actions. "I called the police, for nothing. I judged her without knowing the facts." And now, she trailed off, realizing she had just witnessed a teenager demonstrate courage, skill, and responsibility in a way she never had. Across the street, neighbors were slowly returning to their routines, but the whispers continued. "Did you see that? She handled it perfectly," one neighbor said. Another added, "I've never seen someone so young command respect like that." Children who had been peeking through windows now retold the story excitedly to anyone who would listen. Karen felt her pride shrinking with each passing moment. She had imagined herself as the protector, the vigilant guardian of the neighborhood, yet she had been wrong. Completely wrong. The lesson was clear: assumptions can mislead, and courage isn't always loud or obvious, it can be quiet, disciplined, and earned. Emily, meanwhile, moved with the same calm precision she had shown all morning. She waved politely at neighbors, offered a brief nod to the officers as they drove away, and finally entered her home with quiet dignity. Her badge was still pinned perfectly, her uniform flawless, her posture a testament to her training. Karen watched her leave and felt something she hadn't expected: admiration. "She's incredible," she admitted silently. Her mind couldn't stop comparing her own frantic behavior to Emily's calm, methodical actions. Karen realized that courage wasn't about panic or reacting first, it was about preparation, respect, and staying composed under pressure. Then, as if the universe wanted to underline the lesson, Mr. Thompson approached her carefully. "Karen," he said gently, "sometimes the people we doubt the most end up teaching us the biggest lessons." Karen nodded slowly, feeling the truth of his words. Her eyes softened as she looked across the street, imagining Emily walking with purpose, confidence, and respect. She realized that she had been so focused on rules and appearances that she had missed the most important part: understanding the person before judging them. For the first time that morning, Karen smiled, not the confident, self-assured smile she usually wore, but a quiet, humble smile. She understood the irony. She had called the police to protect the neighborhood, but in reality, she had been the one learning a lesson. The neighborhood itself seemed changed. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. Even the children spoke differently, pointing out Emily's actions with admiration rather than fear. The story of the morning would be told over and over, a reminder that appearances can deceive, but character always reveals the truth. Karen finally returned to her porch, sitting down slowly. She stared at the street, thinking about the past hour, about her panic, about Emily's poise. And then she whispered to herself, almost like a promise, "Next time, I'll look closer. I'll understand before I judge. I won't make the same mistake again." In that moment, Karen realized that some lessons couldn't be taught, they had to be experienced. And today, she had been taught by a young girl with courage, preparation, and a calm mind. As the neighborhood settled fully back into its quiet rhythm, Karen's gaze lingered on Emily's home. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she saw Emily, and she knew, without a doubt, that the girl had earned the respect of everyone around her. For Karen, the morning had begun with fear and judgment, but it ended with humility, reflection, and a newfound appreciation for the young girl who had turned an ordinary street into a stage for extraordinary courage. And somewhere deep down, Karen also knew that the story wasn't just about a badge, a gun, or a misunderstanding. It was about trust, respect, and learning that true authority comes from character, not fear. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the quiet street. The events of the morning lingered like a vivid memory, etched into the minds of everyone who had witnessed them. Emily had returned home, her badge still shining, her uniform immaculate, her demeanor calm yet proud. Karen remained on her porch, staring across the street at Emily's home. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel something she rarely did: humility. The adrenaline, the panic, the assumptions, all of it had dissolved into clarity. She realized that the morning's events were more than a simple misunderstanding, they were a lesson she would carry forever. The neighborhood, too, had shifted. Conversations now carried tones of admiration and reflection. Children retold the story of Emily's composure and courage. Neighbors whispered about how fear can cloud judgment, and how respect and preparation reveal true strength. Karen's mind wandered back to the exact moment she had dialed 911. She remembered the frantic thoughts, the imagining of worst-case scenarios, the certainty that she was protecting everyone. And now, the irony of it all hit her like a wave. In just 42 seconds, she had misjudged a young girl, and in that same time, the police had seen the truth, and Emily had proven her worth beyond doubt. Karen took a deep breath and whispered to herself, almost as if making a promise, "Never again. I will look closer. I will understand before I judge." Fear should never replace knowledge. From a distance, Emily emerged from her house again, this time carrying a small certificate she had received from the police. She walked with calm dignity, nodding politely to neighbors who greeted her quietly. Even Karen, still seated, couldn't help but nod in silent respect. One of the officers, who had stayed a moment longer to observe, approached Karen and said softly, "You saw it all today. Not everyone can handle lessons like this, but you did. You witnessed courage, and sometimes that is worth more than taking action." Karen nodded, her chest tight with emotion. She realized that the story was bigger than a badge, bigger than fear, bigger than rules. It was about character. About staying calm under pressure. About judging carefully. About respecting preparation and discipline. As Emily disappeared down the street, heading toward her next task with poise and confidence, Karen felt a quiet transformation within herself. The lesson had been delivered not by words, but by example. Not by lectures, but by action. Not by authority, but by respect earned. The street was quiet once again, but it felt different. Charged with lessons learned, with respect earned, with the knowledge that appearances can deceive, and that true courage can come in the smallest, most unexpected forms. Karen finally stood and looked across the street one last time. She didn't feel embarrassed anymore, just humbled, enlightened, and changed. She had called the police to protect the neighborhood, but in the end, she had been the one who learned the most. And as the sun set behind the trees, casting golden light across the quiet street, Karen whispered a final thought that would linger in her mind forever. 42 seconds can change everything, and sometimes, the ones we doubt the most teach us the lessons we need the most. The story ended not with fear, not with anger, but with respect, humility, and a quiet sense of awe for Emily, for the lesson, and for the power of composure and courage in the face of misunderstanding.